Congressman, what did you learn yesterday that has changed the way you are witnessing this hurricane tonight?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Lawrence. And I'm here in Orlando. We're a few hours away from getting the really serious part of the storm. We've had rain and wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour so far. Being on that plane a few days ago was a very enlightening and educational experience and a very intense experience. You know, my entire life growing up in the state of Florida, I've gotten used to hurricanes. I've gotten used to waking up, looking at the news, seeing the prediction of where to go, seeing all these models, but not fully understanding where this information comes from. And even though we have great technology now, there are still data points that have to be collected within the hurricane. And for people who don't know, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has an amazing, heroic team that they call the Hurricane Hunters. And these folks are pilots, technicians, engineers, scientists, and meteorologists. And they fly into these storms, flights going anywhere between 8 and 12 hours. And they drop beacons within the storm, drop different things within it to collect data about the pressure, the size of the waves, and a bunch of different things. They send this data to the National Hurricane Center, and that is how we get all the information that we get about these storms. So this data literally saves lives. And I have to mention that there are people in Congress who have voted against funds for this important administration. And not just that, but Project 2025 wants to get rid of NOAA. And so it would literally cause us to not be able to save more lives. And so either way, it was incredibly intense experience. There were times where we free fell thousands of feet because of the way that they fly the plane within the hurricane. But it was an honor to be there. I learned so much about how important the work NOAA does is and how important the hurricane hunters are.
I just want to go back over that point about Project 2025 wanting to abolish NOAA, along with abolish the Department of Education. Abolish is a word that appears frequently in that document, but they want to abolish the scientific collection of data by the federal government that has been able to warn people in Florida how to save their lives and how much time they have to save their lives. They just want to eliminate that information system.
Yes, and this whole thing of Project 2025 and wanting to get rid of NOAA while at the same time wanting to get rid of the mention of climate change and the climate crisis as well shows that not only do they want to deny the issue, but they want to deny us the means and solutions to deal with the issue. And we see this happen all the time. You know, I'm on the House Oversight Committee. I have my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who constantly want to badger and talk about a lot of our agencies and departments. They're not doing their job. They're horrible. They're bureaucrats, this and that. And then at the same time, vote against budget increases to ensuring these agencies have the resources that they need. It's complete hypocrisy. And it's what's going on here in Florida. And the thing about it is this data saves lives. There are people who have already died because of this hurricane today, and we're going to have more discussions over the coming days and weeks about how these two hurricanes that seemingly came out of nowhere are here because of the climate crisis and because it's here. But, you know, I'll tell you, Lawrence, when I was driving back from that Hurricane Hunters mission, I was on I-4 leaving kind of the Tampa area, coming back to Orlando, and I broke down being in the car because I'm in stop-and-go traffic. I'm looking to my left and right, and all you see is all these cars full of families, seniors, people, and you look at their face, they've packed up their entire livelihood, and they are scared. And this is becoming more and more of a normal occurrence for Floridians. And so when we talk about the impacts of climate change, of course, it's human lives, it's a death toll, but it's also people being displaced and people having to leave their homes time and time again. It's really sad. We've been focusing on making sure people are prepared here in Central Florida. We were at the emergency operations centers earlier today. I met with lunch workers who serve lunch to kids at school who are staying overnight in shelters to feed the people in the shelters 3 meals a day while we get through this storm. So if I know one thing is for sure, it's that here in Central Florida and across this state, we're going to help each other get through this. We're going to clean up, and then we're going to continue to have these conversations on how we need to make sure we prevent these kind of events happening again. I mean, we're having too many once-in-a-100-year storms over just the last 5 years.
In all of your conversations with the people living in the path of this hurricane, have you found people who believe Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene's statement that, I guess, President Biden controls the weather?
I haven't just yet, but what I have had is I've had people come up to me and ask questions about some of the misinformation they've seen out there. We've saw former President Donald Trump talking about the $750 number without talking about the fact that there are different buckets that people can apply to get direct assistance from FEMA. One of the buckets is an immediate cash send out to help people with things they might have lost, where they need food, baby formula, stuff like that, which $750 can go a long way with that. There's another bucket of funds where people can help get money to help recover their home. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the problem here, and President Biden brought this up, is that when that misinformation goes into the public and people believe it, it means they don't believe or have any kind of faith in their government. And when they don't have faith in FEMA, it means they won't come to these organizations to get the help they need, which means that there are people out there who will need help who won't seek help because they've been lied to. And so what everyone should know is President Biden and Vice President Harris signed and authorized a pre-landfall emergency declaration for FEMA for this hurricane hitting now. FEMA and the federal government has resources up and down this state, working closely with the state and municipal governments, and we are working together to handle this thing. And the last thing we need are politicians trying to make political points and score political points out of this horrible tragedy. Right now, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, we have to come together to save lives and keep people safe, especially people in our most vulnerable communities.
Unfortunately, a lot of the victims in the path of this hurricane right now cannot hear you say that. They don't have access to television right now for obvious reasons. Their phone batteries might be dying, and they might not be able to have internet access over the course of this. And so in situations like this, word of mouth actually becomes more important than it normally is. And Donald Trump has been poisoning, and Marjorie Taylor Greene have been poisoning the word of mouth, or trying to anyway. How much is that getting in the way of helping people?
It gets in the way. It really does get in the way, because what it does is it erodes faith. When I come to a mic and I say something, when our county mayor comes to a mic and says something, when someone from FEMA comes to a mic and says something, we need folks who are watching and who get this information to help us disseminate it so our neighbors understand. Something we always say here in Florida is, like, communities, we have to take care of each other. Neighbors have to take care of neighbors. I'm here at my parents' house right now, getting through the storm with them. It's going to hit here in Orlando in just a couple hours. We haven't gotten the worst of it yet. But when I got here to the house, my dad was out talking with neighbors, talking to each other, taking care of each other. And the problem is, when people start believing this and misinformation, they could be spreading lies. And again, if those lies get spread, people might not reach out to get the help that they need and the help that they deserve. And so, again, it is dangerous. It can cost us human lives when politicians, especially people with large platforms, spread mis and disinformation just to try to get ahead, just to try to get political points. It's a damn shame, and it's going to cost lives. And so we need people to focus on the truth. We cannot play politics with these hurricanes or these storms. We need to focus on saving people, helping people, and making sure we get on the other end of this.
Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.